All right, this is Heather Longoria. I'm the host of the I Am a New Therapist web series. And I started this series because I graduated from the Center for Neurosomatic Studies in February and realized that I had so many questions after graduation. So once I started practicing. So today I am talking to Casey Smith, who is the owner of, is it the Sarasota Pain Treatment Center? What's your
Yes.
official? Okay.
Yes.
And how long ago did you graduate from CNS, Casey?
So I want to say when I showed up at the office or at the clinic, it was around 2011, 2012, I want to say. I think 2011. I came in as a therapist who had graduated from another school and
Oh,
actually begun taking the seminars and was fortunate enough to kind of get in at the tail end of things before the school became official. And I realized and appreciated the fact that basically the senior therapists were trying to create more continuity in the type of work that we did. So I didn't take it lightly. I knew I was very fortunate getting in, being able to work at the practice, studying the work and everything like that, and not having to go through the CNS program because it wasn't even established yet.
oh, I
So
see.
in some ways I was lucky, other ways I wasn't. Many of the like the personal training and all the extras that we do at CNS now, I didn't have access to. I had to go out and venture on my own. And if I wanted it, I had to go out and get it. So I did my best to almost kind of sculpt myself into a version of what I anticipated our students were going to be as they came out and graduated. I didn't want to, kind of not educate myself in certain ways and then have and understand that we wanted more continuity and not offer that or not be kind of at the same standard or up to par with the students that I knew we were going to be graduating. And I'm glad I did because the students that are coming out we're finding are quite exceptional. And unless you really know your stuff, they're going to outthink you. They're going to outsmart you.
Well, and you taught at the school too for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, I started as a TA, shadowing Kevin. And then I want to say that was I went through a whole, class cycle. So about three semesters or whatever until graduating class came out. And then I'd switched to instructing. And I did that for about a year. But at that point in my career, I was really starting to get to a point where I was burning the candle at multiple ends. And we can kind of go into this a little bit more, but it was my body was starting to take a toll. My priorities in life had started to change, and I realized that I need to shuffle some things and really concentrate some effort and energy in more specific directions instead of trying to spread myself too thin.
Yeah, and I would like to dive into that a little bit more because everybody I've talked to says what an amazing therapist you are. And I know you run a really successful practice and you're booked like way out in advance. And we talked about this a little bit when you let me come down and shadow you for a day. But I think it'd be really helpful for people who are coming out of CNS to get an idea of what your journey was like from a beginning therapist to how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. So, like I said, I graduated around kind of 2011-ish. I had begun taking the neurosomatic seminars while I was still actually at my other school. I continued to practice and then picked up a part-time position at the St. John Clinic in Clearwater. During that time, I was doing some house calls because I did have my massage licensure. So I was out there, I was trying to do body work and, I did what a lot of people are advised to do. I had a price list and I was running around in my Jeep and I was trying to, see as many patients as I could in a day. And I was trying to, use the goniometer and use all these measurement tools and use the posturology chart. And I found that it was so terribly difficult. You can make it happen, but it just made for so much harder of a day and then juggling traffic and things like that. So about the time I started working part-time, I also picked up a room. I found a room for rent on Craigslist back when Craigslist was popular. And I picked up a room. I say it was maybe for like, I don't know, $300 a month or so. And I saw it as an opportunity to not only give me a professional space, but I started, working with the other practitioners that I shared the space with, which their awareness and kind of how they treated gave me some better insight and knowledge. And one was a massage therapist. The other was an acupuncturist. So that was kind of nice. We could kind of share patients, and at the same time, I was very young, so I got to see how they kind of ran their businesses, what I liked, what I didn't like. And I spent about 2 years juggling that and working part-time at the other clinic until finally my practice did start picking up quite a bit. And I realized I just had to, have more time for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when the shift really started coming to. I had to pull back some time that I was spending in Clearwater. I had to focus my energy at my own clinic. And then I realized within maybe about a year or so that it was about 2013, 14, that I was like, you know what, I need to be kind of on my own. I was getting to the point where I'll just kind of chalk it up to, there was a certain amount of jealousy that starts to kind of come out when you do good work. And this isn't just myself, it's any practitioner. If you do good work and there's other therapists around or other practitioners around that, their priorities just aren't there. And they see you start doing more well and things like that. I ran into a problem too with referrals, trying to refer patients back to these practitioners that were sending them to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the hardest thing I found is I was getting it from both ends. The patient didn't want to go back to these practitioners because they had seen them for years or maybe months or whatever the situation may have been. And they saw me for a much shorter period of time and they got more results, better relief. And I can't force somebody to go back and spend money that they don't feel is justified, or to go back and see a practitioner who wasn't really figuring it out in the first place.
Yeah.
So by no fault of my own, I was almost kind of a victim of my own success. I had to, I had to create a little distance. And that's when I made kind of the biggest leap of my career. And that was getting my own office, a space. I was the end all be all. I had to make it happen. If, rent was going to get paid, nobody else was going to pay it. And it was a big responsibility, and my name was on the lease. That was another thing that I kind of lucked out in. And if any new therapist is looking for a space, if you can stay off the leasing contract and stay as a subleaser, do it. Because the minute your name is held liable, you're held to a much higher standard. And if something happens, for instance, if I have a life-changing event in the next 6 months, that doesn't change anything about the contract that you've signed.
Yeah.
So as a therapist, as new therapists, I don't think we fully understand the responsibilities that it comes to owning a business. We see, we get patients in and we have this nice office and we do this and that. And it seems rather simple, but there's a lot of blood, sweat, and sacrifice that really goes into it.
And when you first started, I heard you're just working a ton. You probably still do too. And so can you talk about that a little bit? Because to your point, I think it's really easy to romanticize owning your own business and I get to do what I want and treat how I want. And it's really easy to overlook all of the nitty gritty and the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to say when I was starting, I think to date, I think I treat more patients in a day than most neurosomatic therapists do. And that's just, it works for my schedule. But in the beginning, I also kind of looked at it as I needed hands-on time. I'm a very tactile learner. I have to feel things. You can explain it to me till your face is blue, but I have to feel it. I have to feel the changes. I have to kind of, understand the tissues, what's actually going on. And I knew that I just needed to get hands on bodies. And I think as a young therapist, that's the best thing you can do is you need to throw as many darts at the board as you possibly can, because you think you know until you really know. And there were a lot of lessons I kind of went through where I almost would get thinking things in threes. And it would just be okay, I would have 3 migraine patients. I would have 3 frozen shoulder patients. And it was almost a test. It was okay, well, did what you use on the last one work? And if it didn't, what'd you have to do different?
Yeah.
But I want to say towards the beginning, pardon me, I'd see about 8 a day. So it came out to being around 42 to 45 people a week.
Wow.
And that was working a half day on Thursday, half day on Saturday, full days the remainder of the week. And then the second half of Thursday there for a while, I was teaching, or I was TAing.
Wow.
So my Thursdays were really split up to where I was trying to still get patients in, but I was also I knew I needed to be able to teach. I wanted to be a better speaker and, all that sort of stuff. So I knew that the whole education component and me being at the school would be really beneficial to myself. And I knew that it was only going to be for a short period of time, because it was taking it out of me. And later on down the road, my daughter was on the way.
Yeah.
So I had to start cutting things back. And the first thing to go was Saturdays. I was like, I want my weekends, which I think as a therapist, that's a great goal. I remember doing house calls and having to leave the house at 3 p.m. on a Sunday. And, you know, 3 p.m. is that, you know, you're finishing something or you're going into something, and I'd have to go take a call or I'd have to go take a patient. And it bothered me a lot, but I was giving up things that I knew later in life I wouldn't have to give up on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of work. I mean, I want to say the clinic will be going on its 7th year. 7th year this coming January, and it's grown quite a bit. A lot of the goals that I'd set for myself, I've accomplished, and I'm now at a place where I'm almost kind of evolving into what I want to do next. You know, how I want to continue to grow the clinic, how I want to continue to spread kind of awareness and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great. I had to create almost a little space for myself to kind of breathe.
Yeah.
Because you get so caught up in it, and if you let it, you know, patients can start to run your life, and you almost become a slave to your own creation. So at a certain point, you know, you have to give in. You have to be willing to put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. You know, you have to be the janitor some days. You have to be your own business card designer some days. Your roles are going to be vast, and basically the hope at the end of it all is that you can pull back a little bit and you've created something that's, you know, somewhat sustainable, and it's yours, and you can run it the way that you actually want it to be ran.
And that gets me into what else I wanted to talk to you about. Because when I was watching you treat, it was really interesting to watch you treat, because you have such a different approach from what I've seen before. Like, what I noticed is you don't spend a lot of time working one muscle. It's like you would work parts of it. You would do a lot of joint mobilizations. You would go somewhere else and you would come back. And like, even though you only worked the muscle for just like a couple minutes, it was already way looser. So that was very eye-opening to me, because it's like I'll spend like 15 minutes trying to get the deltoid to let go, you know?
Plowing through it. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. I'm like, it's not getting any better. So, and one thing too that you pointed out to me while you were treating is that how important it is to treat SPMs first, and then also to look at the riding reflex, and if that's not like operational, to treat that first. So could you walk us through like how you approach a session and why you think it's important to treat those things first? Yeah.
So in the beginning, I was much like any other therapist. I focused on, you know, what's that dot mean? What's that low shoulder mean? What's that high shoulder mean? And my thought process would get stuck there. And as I got better, I would start looking at, okay, well, it's elevated and it's forward. You know, what does that mean? And really trying to understand and grasp, like, what do I have to do to get this to eliminate itself? And I want to say within the past year or two, I started studying a little bit of Chinese medicine, the meridians, things like that, and almost trying to see how things were connected in ways that, you know, we understood in neurosomatic therapy, but other practitioners have kind of figured out as well. And what I was finding was there's always like a chain, you know, causal chain kind of reaction. And I started looking at, okay, well, this causes this. Maybe these muscles are in close proximity, you know, maybe they reflex off of each other. Maybe there's an SPM affecting the shoulder, and we're seeing a lot of switching. But as a new therapist, you don't go, oh, that's significant. And what I would do is I'd beat my head against the wall trying to get somebody's shoulder to release. Meanwhile, when they laid down, it was obvious they had a pericardial issue or a lung issue. And I would almost keep working around the problem. And what I've almost kind of find trick myself is if the SPM is strong enough, it'll actually change some of the standing measurements. So I've seen measurements change in the standing, you know, their AC joints will change, their clavicles will change. And what's interesting is all that pressure is coming from this visceral tension, that if you keep trying to work the structures around it and it keeps torquing the rib cage from the inside, you maybe create a little bit of change, but inevitably that pressure is pulling on all the surrounding structure. So everything begins to react again. Also, the Lovett Reactor was a big deal. We don't have the capabilities of shooting x-rays down in Sarasota. Doesn't mean that, you know, I couldn't try to become buddy and get in a chiropractor's office and kind of be at their will then and maybe get some scans. That's not what I wanted. Again, that kind of deviates from how I want to run my office.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to figure out ways of, okay, how do we measure for leg length inequities
Yeah.
when we don't have scans? And that's when I recognized the Lovett Reactor significance, that I would sometimes lift a patient that didn't need lifted because I wasn't spending the time correcting their Lovett. And the minute I would, things would level back out. And I was almost doing an injustice by getting a lift in there almost too soon. So if anything, because I don't have the ability to shoot x-rays, I almost take a step back when it comes to leg length.
Mm-hmm.
I'll usually use about, I try to figure it out by at least like their second or third visit, depending on what they have going on and the significance of everything. It's like, okay, we've really tried to eliminate this and it's not coming back. And then we'll follow up that with, okay, if we do put a lift underneath there, can we muscle test and see a difference in stability? Am I seeing changes in the cranial bones? Because if everything's communicating properly, I should see your cranial bones moving if I'm leveling out your pelvis. If things are stuck, you might not see that change initially. And I think that can be a bit, it just kind of tricks you as a new therapist, because you see this and you're like, oh yeah, like the hips look great, but you're almost hyper focused on what's going on in the lower body and not appreciating how the upper body or the cranium is reacting to these shifts and changes. And that's when I was realizing, oh, okay, I would have to do more work or really try to get their Lovett Reactor to synchronize, get some extra tissue to loosen up, and then attempt to actually try to lift and see how they balanced out and how the Lovett Reactor and everything actually worked properly afterwards.
And so I have two questions there. First question is, do you think it's necessary, like, do you just need time and bodies in order for these concepts to kind of sink in and make sense to you? Or do you think that there's a way to like jump a level and be like see things at the way you're seeing them now? Or do you just need like time and practice to get to the point that you're at?
I think a lot of it is time and practice. I mean, I can explain certain things to people. It's, for instance, say a patient comes in with, elbow pain and it's their anconeus, like you've palpated it. It's very tender. They mention that, hey, difficulties pressing up against stuff, et cetera. And you see that they have an elevated shoulder too. And they don't really complain of like headaches or migraines or any numbness. And you're just like, you know what? I'm just going to go right after that elbow. Like I can get that thing to release. I've done this. And what happens is it isn't your average cookie, so to speak. And what happens is maybe the tricep is a bit more active and the tricep is ultimately driving the shoulder up. And you have this kind of chain reaction happening up the arm that ultimately is still aggravating the anconeus and those attachment sites around the elbow. And you could work on that muscle, say 2-3 times, and it keeps refacilitating, or maybe it gets better and they do something simple and it comes back. Those were the things that were kind of happening that I started looking at, okay, what else is feeding into the system? Because I was in that place where you were describing, I'm spending 15 minutes working a muscle.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to. Sometimes those tissues have adhesions or they've been locked up and you have to work them for a long period of time. But sometimes you can create more effective change by working multiple muscles that all are synergistic. They're all either attaching near one another or they help with a similar function. And you could easily take that patient that has the elbow pain, go through, do some tricep work, maybe do some work to get that shoulder elevation to go down, and then go back and treat the anconeus. And what you'll find is because you're starting to break up that chain, it almost creates a little space for things to open up a bit easier and for their nervous system to actually calm down. So it's a bit more receptive to the type of work that we do. Because it is, if you're working down towards the attachments of bones, it's very stimulating. Yeah. So you have to learn to almost kind of finesse how you can get into those areas, how you can actually get it to release without beating up the patient too much and overwhelming their nervous system, because then the body starts to work against you. And now you're having to get really clever on how to try to get into some of these areas that are now being very resistant. And some of that comes back to the hands-on portion. You have to know what it feels like when something releases. And you may think but as a therapist, over the years, you'll realize like, oh, wow. Like I look back at some of the first people I treated, I'm like, I wish I could have those people back.
Yeah, right.
Like I did okay, but I could do way better now, and it's just, you realize over the years as you practice more that it's like, okay, I could do better. I could, I really feel how this changed now. I really know what adhesions feel like. I can feel when blood flow comes into an area. I can feel when areas get more supple. And that's the palpation stuff. That's the stuff that does take more time. And that's why it's hands-on bodies. You have to get that time in because you don't know what it feels like otherwise. You think you could be telling them something released till you're blue in the face, but did it really?
Yeah.
Or did it release 100%? And I found even for myself that I would treat an area and think it's good and I would move on. And what an injustice to the patient, because I may have overlooked something that was still 40, 50, 60% there, thinking it was good just because it changed for the day. And the next time they came in, my thought process would go to somewhere else. And I'd start focusing on maybe another problem that they had. And then I would run into this issue where a couple treatments later, well, that old pain that I thought I had resolved is back again. And now as a therapist, you almost go, well, I did it right.
Uh-huh.
Like, what else could it be? Like, I don't understand why it's back again. And you think that you're kind of above error.
Uh-huh.
And you'll find a lot of times when you go back and as your knowledge kind of improves, you'll go back and recheck some of these things and you're like, oh, duh, it was just
Uh-huh.
this. So that happens a lot.
Well, and maybe if you could give some advice for us new therapists, because I see that all the time, that even I've only been practicing for like 7 months and already I'm so much better than I was when I first started. And I realized that as a therapist, you have to have like almost practice patience, but it feels like so unfair for the patient. I'm like, you should really go see Randy because I know Randy can fix you. It's like versus me
Right.
working on you. It's like in the therapists too, we're like a really generally an empathetic bunch. So we want what is right for the patient. And so sometimes I struggle with that because it's like I want what's right for the patient, but I feel like probably they would get better treatment with another therapist, but I need to get practice as a therapist. So there's like this loop my brain gets stuck in.
Yeah. And there are certain situations that come about now where it's like, definitely, just go see this person. But I've always started taking a different perspective on how to look at that. And I kind of look at it as though that person ended up in your care for a reason. You're probably ultimately going to help them. Yeah, they could go to, the top-notch person, and I'm sure they could whip it into shape, but they may not create the same connection with that person that they may connect with you. They may get something out of that, therapist to patient relationship that you offer that somebody else doesn't offer. And they could also be part of your growth. That could be a lesson that you actually need. And we are quick to go, oh, we want what's best for the patient. And sometimes what's best for the patient is actually working with you. You just kind of have to step to the challenge. And it's a matter of, if something isn't working, don't be afraid to ask. Like, I try to do my diligence. So if Annika, she's another therapist at the office, if I review charts at the end of the day and I'm looking at things and I'm seeing patterns, or I'm seeing maybe something was a significant problem, or there was an SPM that was overlooked, or maybe a leg length or a lift that isn't working quite right, I'm making notes on those charts, but I still will have her reach out to me and say, hey, while you have a second, like, I've been doing this and it's not working. And sometimes it's as simple as something wasn't releasing that it should have been, or maybe it was something else was maybe providing a little extra feedback and it just wasn't letting go 100%. So you do have something to give as a therapist. So in your mind, to let yourself go to immediately, like, you got to go see the best sort of a thing.
Right.
Don't always think you need to do that. Give yourself a shot. And the other thing is, I kind of learned is you have to learn to just kind of sell yourself. You're marketing yourself. Say it's your business. You want to sell your services. To constantly refer somebody out, you're setting yourself to be a lower standard. You're almost going like, well, I'm not really capable of doing this, so just go here. Take the challenge, be willing to beat your head against the wall a little bit. And a lot of times you'll find that you will care enough that the patient usually won't care so much that they're coming in and maybe not making the fastest progress in the world. Because for the first time, they probably have a practitioner that genuinely cares, and they can see that you care. And when you have conversations with them and you say, hey, I spent Saturday reviewing your case or trying to figure this out, and I would like to do this with you today, you will literally see patients light up. Because it wasn't, it was a weekend and all that sort of stuff, but somebody cared about their well-being and how they were actually improving and wanting them to get better when they weren't present. It wasn't during my 15 minutes or my hour or whatever the case may be. It's like they genuinely cared, and now they're showing up with what they think is really going to help me. And usually people are willing to participate in that journey. So don't be so quick to, want to refer out and things like that. Really give something, a good shot. Put a good 5-6 treatments into it.
Okay.
You'd be surprised at what you can really get done and what you can start to change. And if you do feel like you're floundering or you're maybe working up their nervous system or overworking certain tissues,
Yeah.
give that area a break. I'll let areas breathe. Like you had mentioned, I kind of bounce around. I'll work on something. I'll come back to it. And it seems like it just melts.
Yeah.
What I've really found, and we kind of understand this with movement, as your body is in locomotion, it's trying to adjust. And what I've also realized is your pain, your perception of pain also is kind of altered when your body's in movement. So usually you'll hear some patients say like, hey, I have low back pain, but it's only bothersome when I'm standing or when I'm sitting. But when I'm walking, it's great.
Yeah.
And if you can get a little movement in, so for instance, I work on, say, a bicep or something, I'll maybe do a little shake in their arm. And it's amazing at how quickly the nervous system calms down. It stops sending that reinforced signal of like, hey, things are really tight, they're really reactive. And by doing that, I not only kind of control the patient's pain response and how their nervous system's reacting, but I can create more effective change in the tissue. And then when I come back to that area, it's naturally just a bit more calmed down. It's softer. Yeah. I can maybe then get in a little bit deeper. I can maybe try to hit those attachments that I wasn't able to get to before because things were so bound up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I covered everything that I had. And I want to rewind just a little bit and go back to the Lovett Reactor relationship, because there are people who watch the videos that aren't neurosomatic therapists. So I know we only have about 5 minutes, which probably isn't enough to really introduce Lovett Reactor a whole lot. But when you say to treat Lovett Reactor, can you give just like kind of a brief kind of overview of what you mean to somebody who has no idea what Lovett Reactor is?
Yeah. So for instance, if someone's, you're looking at someone's structure and their right hip is higher and their right temporal bone is higher. What we're looking at is the relationship between the pelvic bones and the temporal bones, the ears. Basically, for every imbalance, we expect a counterbalance. And when we don't see that counterbalance taking place, that means things are kind of gridlocked. Mm-hmm. So this would be a great instance of maybe somebody was in a car accident. And maybe they was a T-bone and they were impacted on their left side. And, maybe the lateral side of their hip went into spasm. So they've developed this tilt. And they've been dealing with this tilt for a while. And what I found is, say you're doing your measurements and you're seeing all this stuff. And your first thing is, oh, wow, here's this pelvic tilt. The rest of you is off. You've had this trauma. You've probably been dealing with this for a while. Let's see if you need a lift. You could do a lift in that person's shoe and you may not see any change whatsoever because they have such a strong fixed pattern from this trauma that things on the high side are really active, things on the low side are really active, and really no adjustment wants to take place. So then you take a step back and you're like, okay, that's probably not going to fix it. What can I do today to try to improve how they look so that I can get a better read or a better kind of measurement on how their lower body is actually correcting, if they need a lift, how their cranium's correcting, et cetera. So I would then go and say, okay, well, let's spend some time on your iliopsoas. Let's get that high side of your hip to let go. Let's get some pressure off your lower lumbar. Let's get some pressure off that SI joint. Let's take your pelvis through a couple mobilizations after I get that muscle to really release. Maybe I'll even check and ask you specifically, do you have constipation? Do you have diarrhea? Is there anything I need to be looking at on the opposite side, maybe on the descending colon, or maybe on that right side where their ileocecal valve is that could be feeding into the iliopsoas. Mm-hmm. So that's the SPM's going to come back in there again. It's like, okay, so the Lovett Reactor isn't working. Is there an SPM present? Oh yeah, there is. Okay. Get that sucker gone, eliminate it, go back through, retreat the tissues. And as you start to create a little mobility, you'll want to do the same thing in the upper portion. So, look at your cranial measurements. Is there maybe a slight TMJ problem? Is there some wedging that's affecting the ear? Or is it maybe just the temporalis, and come to find out they suffer from headaches too? Mm-hmm. So you spend some time, you get the temporalis to loosen up, you loosen up the suboccipitals, you do some of this general work to get these attachment sites to soften, and then take them through a couple mobilizations and a couple dural tube decompressions and everything, and then have them walk around a little bit, maybe walk down the hallway, walk around your room, just get a little movement. Again, the body's trying to adjust as it moves. Mm-hmm. Give them a little time, and then stand them back up and reassess. Maybe the hips are in the same position and maybe there is truly a leg length inequity, but then you'll find that the temporal bones or the cranium will start to change. So we'll start to see that Lovett Reactor system start to break up and start to try to communicate more efficiently. And then we can try the lift again. And then, oh, lo and behold, now when we put the lift in, their pelvis is actually more mobile, so it can try to adjust. And we're finding that the temporal bones and the cranium is actually readjusting now too. So now we've broken up that pattern and we have a better judge of what's actually going on. We know the Lovett Reactor system is working more efficiently. We've now eliminated some SPMs. We've eliminated some fixations. Now when we put that lift in, the patient can then go out, walk around, and things are going to come together much easier compared to, hey, you have a short leg, here's a lift, get out there and walk on it.
Yeah.
And then leave your care, and their Lovett Reactor system's still stuck. These fixations are still stuck. Their SPMs are still firing, and they're calling you 2 days later and they're like, I have so much pressure in my left knee, I'm about to lose my mind. And you're going, well, it was there. And you saw it and all this stuff, but you may have been over focused on certain things. And because you weren't appreciating the totality of it all and really factoring in the entire structure as to what's going on, you missed a couple things. Yeah. And now that's kind of when you end up in that situation where they come back and you're like, well, I already did X, Y, and Z, so I probably don't need to do those again. When probably you do.
It's every time I work on the human body, I'm like, this is the most complicated, and it's not even a 3-dimensional puzzle. It's probably like a 5 or 6-dimensional puzzle that I have ever solved, because it's like, not only can things go wrong with the bones and the muscles, but then with the thoughts and the emotions and everything, it all gets layered in there. So it's so complicated and fascinating. And
oh yeah. Oh yes, it can be. There's definitely those moments where you're driving yourself nuts, like what could possibly be happening. And to this day, there's like I had mentioned, I want to call some patients back that I had tried to treat previously that didn't work out. You have patients that come through your office that they're really in a place where maybe you don't have the skill level, maybe you've sent them off to another senior therapist, maybe they didn't have what it took. And it could take a revelation. I mean, I had a revelation in the past 2 weeks, and I've been going in. And again, this kind of comes back to, hey, I've been thinking about you. Hey, I've been thinking about doing this, and I know you do this. And I mean, think about the just the rapport you're kind of building with people when you come in and you say that sort of thing. But then when you follow it up with, hey, what you just pulled out of your hat actually worked. Like now you're the wizard, right? Now you're the true authority. Now they understand that not only are you getting better as a practitioner, but you also care about the patients that you're seeing. And I think that's ultimately what's really gotten Sarasota Pain Treatment Center a lot of success. Is I really put, I have my time. I value my time, especially my time with my family now. But when I'm with patients, I'm with patients. I'm thinking about what they got going on. I'm trying to figure it out. My train of thought is focused in there. And that came from, I had an instance when I was I'm still young, but younger therapist, that I was working on a patient, and I don't know what was going on that day, but I was stressed. I was angry. Something was going on. And I remember they just asked me, they were like, are you okay today? Like, are you mad? And I was like, busted. And from that day forward, I was just like, you know what, regardless of what I got going on, how terrible life may seem, I got to show up and I got to put in work. And by doing that and kind of blocking things out and separating that family and kind of business time, it really helped, because patients noticed the difference. They were like, okay, he's willing to go above and beyond. But it was also just almost like a recognizing that it's not just you in the room, and it's not all about you and you trying to figure it out. It is about that other person and how you come in, how you hold yourself, how you behave. That impacts that person a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I follow HeartMath.org, and they talk a lot about co-resonance and how our electromagnetic field from our heart goes out 15.
Oh yeah, we talked about that a little bit.
Yeah. So it's and that gave me a lot of hope too. I did a session with the Movement Maestro, who's a physical therapist that does some coaching. And because when I first started, I'm like, even though I know so much, I feel like I don't really know enough to help people, and it's so overwhelming to figure out where to start, where do you get into the system? And she's like, the most important thing is for you to connect with the patient. Giving them your undivided attention for an hour is just super healing in and of itself. So that gave me some hope.
Well, and you'll feel that or find that with certain patients too. And they're just like, well, I like so-and-so. or
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather see so-and-so. And I think that's my biggest struggle being a therapist that's done this so long. It's not that I'm just the one in Sarasota. It's that I give of myself at a different level, and people kind of pick up on that. And they're like, hey, if I'm going to go get, and not that you're supposed to be like doing like psychiatric type work or anything like that, but when you start working with people and, they're coming in on some of their worst days, or, they have a death in the family or something like that, there's something you can give to that person, even if it's just, a listening ear, and to kind of, do your diligence on the back end. But there's something to be said about creating that connection and, being respectful of your patient's time, cultivating that relationship where they're respectful of your time. They're willing to do what you ask them to do. Because a lot of times you hear of these situations where somebody goes to a PT and they're seeing them 3 times a week, but there's no relationship there. They're frustrated when they show up. They're frustrated when they leave. They're doing the same stuff. They know they could do a lot of it at home, and there's just no connection. No, they don't feel like they're being cared for. They feel like they're in this machine. And you can have a machine, but it has to be a loving machine. It has to be willing to care. There has to be that space. Like, it doesn't mean things have to be run like it's everything's just wild and free. Like, you should have structure. You should have, these boundaries as a therapist in general. But that doesn't mean that they can't be loving boundaries. You don't have to be a dictator about it. But you do have to be, respectful of your time, their time, your own feelings and emotions, and be able to separate the two, but also create a space where they're willing to open up and they're willing to talk about things. One thing I've really found out here in the past, I'd say year, is, and I think we had mentioned this when you'd come into the office that day, was pericardial stress. We used to look at it just as, hey, had a death in the family, maybe going through a divorce, maybe a bad breakup, some college students, something like that. And we feel it, and you can see the change from the stress there. And what I found is some of these people are coming in and they're very anxious, especially my generation, Generation Z. They're stressed, they're anxious, they don't know what they're doing. They're still trying to sort out their own life. And now their body is suffering the repercussions of this. And they may have a persistent neck problem or shoulder problem. And what we'll find is pericardial stress is showing up in every treatment or every other treatment. And it's because they keep triggering it. They keep triggering it. And here's another situation where you could be beating your head against the wall trying to get a shoulder issue to eliminate or a neck problem to eliminate. And they keep refacilitating it, not knowing that there's this emotional feedback loop in the body. So that's another thing where, as a practitioner, you have to have this broad awareness and be able to kind of, explain that to the patient, and then maybe offer some remedies or some things that they could do to try to curb that so it's not so impactful towards their body, because that ultimately leads to you creating more effective change. There may just be some other work that they need to do, and it doesn't mean you have to do it with them, but you can at least give them some instructions on breathing techniques or maybe meditation or things like that, just some things to help kind of calm their body down. But in doing so, you develop yourself into being a better practitioner, and you're better suited to handle more complex issues because you understand them differently. And like you said, when you first learn it, everything's kind of like here and there, and you have all these thoughts and ideas swirling. The way I kind of describe it is that I was definitely in that same place. I mean, I remember waking up after, I think, my first seminar, second seminar, just like talking in my sleep. And I was repeating what Randy had said like the day before. And I was just like, I was alarmed. Like, I was in a new city. I was thinking somebody broke into the apartment. Like, I was ready to go, gung ho. And I'm looking around, didn't see anything. And I was thinking about what I was hearing. And I was like, I was hearing neurosomatic terms. And I was just like, I realized then how overloaded my brain was. And I'd never been to a place where my brain was taking on that much. But it's almost like the plane landed. After a couple of years of practicing and working on people, and you're understanding how these connections happen, it's like you open up a new portion of your brain that's under construction. And as you refine it and those synapses get more refined and it begins to sculpt itself, it becomes this finely tuned machine where you look at things, and it's almost, it's terrible, but I look at, patients sometimes, or I'll meet somebody in public and they're telling me about this or that, and I'll just smile, or I start, I have a little chuckle or something like that. And this thing that they've built up in their head, this pain problem, is so simple. It's so simple. But if you're talking to a new therapist or somebody who doesn't understand the work as well, it can be like, oh, well, yeah, we can probably fix that sort of a thing. Whereas in my head, when I meet these people, I'm like, oh yeah, this is probably happening. This is probably happening. And, it's just, you develop a more confidence, but you also, the confidence comes from understanding this causes this, and this influences this. So as you get more refined at everything too, it just becomes, it all comes together, and you can kind of better navigate the waters as to what you need to do and when.
Yeah. Good. You just need more data points to see the patterns. It sounds like it's like,
yeah. How to really bring it all together. It's like I said, you go from what does this elevation mean and what does this rotation mean to what's this elevation and rotation mean to, okay, well, what's the shoulder measurements doing in relationship to the cranial measurements? How is the shoulder change affecting what's going on in the head and neck? And it just evolves and evolves and evolves, but they're big revolutions. You go through these little cycles and you learn little bits, and then your cycles get bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you have almost like a cycle complete, you have these revelations, so to speak. And like, that's kind of what I've been going through in the past few months. It's like, oh, okay, so do this. Like, this is a big contributing factor. And you can just overlook it, before that. And those were situations where, back when I was a younger therapist working at the clinic up there, I'd be treating a patient and I'd come in one day and they're like, hey, you got to shadow Paul today. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, did I have an opening or what happened? They're like, oh no, your patient's seeing him. And I'm like, crap. Because I immediately knew. I was like, okay, I didn't do the right thing. But Paul's a very gracious guy, and he would always say do this. And I learned from Paul that if he says do this and understand why he said do this. Don't take it upon yourself to like half-ass it and then go back and think, oh yeah, I got this handled. Because there's so many years of skill and experience. It's like, no, this is what's causing. Like, follow this path, understand this path, and it'll get you to kind of where you want to go. And I had a lot of those learning lessons or learning curves. And I think that it helped me a lot because it humbled me. Oftentimes we think we're doing the right things, and then somebody shows up like a Jedi and they spend 5 minutes with somebody.
Yeah, right.
And they're just, your patient's floored. They're looking at you weird, you're blown away. Like, how did I overlook that all this time? But it happens. It happens more times than not, especially when you're a new therapist. But it still happens as you get more refined in this type of work too.
Well, yeah. And then you watch Paul treat somebody and he's like, in neurosomatic therapy, it's like very much, it's like compression with opposition, glides, work the attachments. And Paul's like, burp, 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 done. Yep.
Well, and that's when I started realizing in the past couple of years, I was like, and I started looking at the Chinese medicine component. I was like, there's something here that we don't fully understand. There's something that can't be communicated through a textbook. And there's a certain level of understanding that just evolves, I think, that kind of blossoms out of this neurosomatic seed that's kind of planted. And I realized in looking back, I was just like, some of those days where I have great days, I'm treating more like Paul. It's like, I'm doing a little bit of this, I'm doing a little bit of that. And it doesn't seem like I really had to do much of anything, but everything is better. You can feel the tissue change. The patient can feel things change. You can see their structure realign. I mean, they're just great days. But again, it takes a lot of thought and a lot of, refined knowledge to get to that point. But it's awesome. It's awesome. Neurosomatic therapy is definitely a journey.
Yeah. Right. Well, and to your point, I want to be respectful of your time. So I promise we keep it to around half an hour. So I did just wanted to tie up some of the really important things I think that we talked about. And I think really the end of the conversation was really helpful for us new therapists, just putting in the time, getting our hands on bodies, really caring about the patient, being cognizant of SPMs and how the viscera can impact the function, and being aware of the relationship between the hips and the pelvis, and making sure that that's coordinated, and just kind of entering into the pattern recognition there is probably a good place to start.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Anything else you want to add, Casey, before we tie up for today?
No, not unless you want to talk for another 2 hours.
Oh man, I totally could.
We may have to do another one.
Yeah, for sure. I'm reading this book right now called Power versus Force, and it's all about like the levels of consciousness in the world and how we're all connected to. He calls it kind of like the mainframe, and we're all like just outlets of the mainframe, and he talks about how like these thought patterns will pop up in consciousness, and then eventually we can tap into those thought patterns. So like, as you're describing all of this, I'm just seeing like the swirls and the spirals, and like how you're attached to the spiral. Eventually when my consciousness gets there, I'll be able to tap into it as well. So yeah. Yeah, interesting stuff. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, Casey. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for setting it up.
All right. Well, you have a great Sunday.
You too, Heather. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.